Shalom. All praises, honor, and glory unto the Most High, Yahweh Ba'asham Yahweh Ba'asham Rakak Kwadash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of the great millstone, and salutations to all you sincere Akim. And this is your brother Abawan, back again with another video through the spirit and power of Yahweh Ba'asham Yahweh Ba'asham Rakak Kwadash. All praises and glories to you. And this video is going into illegal mining operations that go on, here in specifically the west coast of Africa, right? And basically, this is just a part of the curses, right? After all, is it not written? And let's get that precept. Let's get that precept. Now the heathen shall come in, right? Let's get that. Let's get that. And the stranger shall come in, because a lot of these places where you have these illegal mining operations, it's usually where Jake is in, right? So you have Jakes with these mineral rich, you have Jakes in, so okay, you have Jakes in these mineral rich nations, okay, that have the gold, the precious critical minerals, the oil, the different mineral resources, right, uranium, that are used globally by the Western powers, right? So that you now have different of these hidden nations, right? The Moabites, the Elamites, the East Indians, and even Esau Edom as well, running both legal and illegal mining operations within the country to try to extract those resources and take it back to their own nations to build up their own nations. So this is the book of Deuteronomy 28, verse 43. The stranger that is within thee shall get up over thee, shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the lead, and thou shalt be the tail. Right. So this is the exact one I'm looking for. And when it goes, the stranger shall get in, shall come into thy land, and let's see if I can find that precept. Yeah, but that also applies as well, because funny as it is, right? You now have China borrowing to all these different Israelite nations, okay, and the same thing also happening with Esau, Edom as well, because those are rather they are both strangers. In other words, they are the heathen, right? The other nations. Okay, so let me see if I can find the other preset I was looking for. All right, so let me hold on. I think I saw it right now. So this is here it is. So this is the book of Deuteronomy 28, and I think I just start from the main points, right? Verse 49. Yahweh shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. Right, and this is speaking about, during the transatlantic slave trade period, right, when Esau first came, right, to guard, the northern kingdom first and foremost, and then to the west coast of Africa here with the southern kingdom, right, the triangular slave trade, the discovery of America, the transatlantic slave trade, and then colonization, right? And this is what happened to our people, okay, during that time period. So now Deuteronomy 28 verse 40, verse 50. A nation of fierce countenance which thou shalt not regard the person of the old, nor shew favour to the young. And he shall eat of the fruit of thy cattle, and the fruit of thy land, until thou be destroyed, which also shall not leave thee either corn, or wine, or oil, or the increase of thy kine, or flocks of thy sheep, until he have destroyed thee. Alright, this is of course speaking of Esau, Edom, okay? This is of course speaking of Esau, Edom, which, like I said, and the articles that I have here, that they are basically going into the other nations and their operations. But really, if you really want to go into it, right, all the other nations are doing are just copying the tactics of Esau, Edom. So you have some individuals from these other nations, right? The East Indians, okay, the Moabites, all right, and those are just the ones that I could find. But you also have, even have Edomites as well doing the same thing. So they come into the land, start performing all these illegal operations within it, right, in order to take away the resources, or even this as well, because I found this article, right, a while back, where one of these Edomites was doing the Nigerian prince scam. And you can probably know about that. Where you have this whole thing about Nigeria being one of the top places on the world where you have internet fraudsters, cyber crime or cyber scammers. So this is it right here, okay? And this is from NBC News. The 1st of January 2018, where you have this Edomite basically, pulling or doing Nigerian prince scams all the way in the US, right? And what he was doing with that was, hey, you got using, this is basically the accuser of the brethren at work right here, right? You're causing Jake to take the blame for his own operations. And of course, right, you do have these Nigerian prince scammers here in Nigeria, the romance scams, right, the cyber crimes and so on and so forth, okay. But you still have Esau Edom, right? You still have the heathen as well, because the same thing happened here in Nigeria a few months ago, where you had a Chinese romance scam operation that was basically uncovered, right? And you had a couple of Chinese citizens get arrested, but you now had hundreds of jakes, right? Nigerians also get arrested as well, because basically what they were doing was they were running a whole romance scam operation that was mainly, and the main people that were involved in that scam was Jake, right? So it was Moab, the Chinese, at the head of it, controlling the operation. And they now had Jake doing the grunt work, right? So basically they were like, doing the actual scams, running the operations and so on and so forth. And that's basically, the how it is for our people in this kingdom, right? Especially for jakes that aren't in the truth, where they are all being controlled, right, by the heathen, okay, where basically the heathen are the ones that are you know head up above over them. That's why I read that precept going into the curses, that let's get that the heathen will come into your land and he will get up over you, okay, even to the point of controlling different operations within your land, right? The case in point, the example I'm thinking of in my head right now, the NBA and the NFL, right? Because you have people come out and say, oh well, right, Jake is no longer being oppressed because look at LeBron James, look at the NFL, right? Look at the NBA. And they are talking about the players within the NFL and the NBA. And all they are plantation niggas, okay? Just because they are making a couple of millions, suddenly they are now, suddenly it's now a good operation, right? It's now proof that Jake is no longer being oppressed. Meanwhile, the Edomite owners, right? The Edomites that are in control of the NBA are now making, billions of dollars off the labor of a LeBron James, right? Of a Kevin Durant, of this dude that just recently won the Super Bowl. Yeah, I can't remember his name. I don't watch the NFL like that, so like, yeah. But the NFL, Jalen Hurts, yes, Jalen Hurts, of a Jalen Hurts, right? But they want you to believe that just because LeBron James is being paid like what 500 m's, a year, let's that somehow makes it so that LeBron is making money, and that's the and that and that he is making money in the NBA, when what happened with Deion Sanders, right? Shadow Sanders, Deion Sanders' son, Shadow Sanders, recently, where he was basically dropped to the fourth draft, right? And he was selected by some random team. Shows you that Jake is not in control and Jake is not in power. And it also shows you that the NFL truly is a plantation, because when you find out that this dude was actually supposed to be one of the top draft picks, because he's one of the best quarterbacks to go into that draft, okay? But of course they did not allow him to actually go into the draft and to get put in the position that he was supposed to be, which is a top, a first round, right? Because he was selected in the fourth round. He was supposed to be a first round draft pick, meaning that he was one of the first people that were supposed to be picked up by a team. But they didn't allow that, and basically the reason why was because of, it was basically a situation of Jake trying to get out of the curses carnally, right? So, Deion Sanders, he played in the NFL, right? He got out of the NFL, right? Unlike, majority of our people that are these superstars and celebrities, he did not, trick off and throw away all his money, but he used his money to put, but he, you know, used his money, right, to enrich himself, right, grow his family as well, and eventually he got back into American football by the way of coaching a college team. Got into a successful coaching program. Okay, with I think it was Colorado or Cleveland. I forget which team that he was playing or he was coaching for, and also put his son right as the lead quarterback of that football team. Got success in it, changed the entire team's play and made the team more successful, right? And then and then because of that, man, it was basically a situation of Jake trying to get out of the curses because now, right, Deion Sanders played in the NFL, became successful. His son will now eventually go on to play in the NFL as well and also become successful. And they now have, two generations of successful NFL players. That is just the start of generational wealth, right? Growing wealth and growing influence as well because basically after that what's stopping Deion Sanders from saying, oh well, let me try and get into a team, let me try and coach a team, let me try and own a team, right? Similar to what Michael Jordan did. And that's the reason why Michael Jordan was eventually forced to sell his ownership shares of the Charlotte Hornets, okay? Because he owned his own team. And let's not even go into the fact that the Hornets was one of the worst teams in the NBA. Most likely because they were being shafted within the NBA because Jordan was the owner, right? Or at least had a majority share in the team. And this is the kind of little games that Esau plays, right, in order to keep Jake in captivity in this kingdom. But realistically, the main factor, okay, that is keeping our people down in this kingdom is not whatever Esau is doing. Because let's be honest, man, if the Most High Yahweh Sham Yahushai was with us, right, nothing that Esau would do with it would even really matter, okay? But it's mainly the curses that are affecting our people and keeping us, at the bottom in this kingdom, right? And it should already be known the reason why our people are under those curses, right? So now the NBA's estimated net worth ranges between 90 to 100 billion. This is driven by a significant revenue from media right deals, sponsorships, and team valuations, right? And the media rights deals are gotten because of Jake. The sponsorships are gotten because of Jake. The team valuations are because of Jake. Okay. The league's 30 franchises are collectively valued at around 138 billion, with individual teams like the Golden State Warriors and the New York Knicks exceeding $7 billion. Right. So that is, and this isn't like, oh, this isn't like, oh, the entire team, right, is worth as a whole 7 billion. This is how much revenue they get, right, yearly. Okay, so from selling jerseys, right, from sponsorship deals, right, and so on and so forth, they can get up to 7 billion, you know, and basically the team would be worth 7 billion. In other words, if you want to actually buy the team or get ownership of the team, you have to drop this amount, right? And the main reason why the Golden State Warriors or the New York Knicks or the Los Angeles Lakers are worth this much is because of the Jakes that are playing in the league. Hell, before Jake was even introduced to before Jake started playing basketball, man, basketball was a useless sport. Nobody was watching that. Nobody was watching it, okay? It wasn't until the Harlem Globetrotters, right? It wasn't until Jake got into the game. That's when people started being interested in watching basketball. But that's beside the point, okay? That's just an example, right? To further um bring light to what I want to discuss right now. Ghana arrests three Indian nationals over suspected gold smuggling ring. Right, and let's go to another article again because really the only thing that really matters are the headlines. Right, just to give you an idea of what's going on here in here in Africa. Right, from time to time. Okay, so Tanzania Times: Chinese nationals arrested in Nigeria for illegal mining. Right, and you can clearly see that it's not just Chinese, but it's also Jake among them as well. Right, because like I said, it is usually the heathen that are leading the operation, right? And then it is Jake that's now doing all the grunt work, mining doing the actual mining, right? And the people that get the money are the Chinese, the heathen, the Indians, and even Esau Edom as well, because Esau also has illegal mining operations here in Africa, right along with the national ones the national contracts that are being signed between governments. So, right, or rather, I should say corporations, right? So, a corporation like Oreno, for example, okay, let's go to that. A corporation like Oreno, for example, right? So let's get that Oreno, and this is Oreno. Let's see. Okay, I guess I spelled that wrong. So I'll just type in Oreno Mining Company. Right. So a corporation like Oreno, okay, this is how they spell it. Orano, right? So Oreno Mining is a subsidiary of the French nuclear energy company Oreno Group, formerly Areva. Its leading player in global uranium mining and processing industry, with operations in countries like Canada, Kazakhstan, and Niger. Oreno's mining activities include mining, dismantling, conversion, enrichment, recycling, logistics, and engineering, all related to nuclear fuel cycle. Right. So you have companies like Oreno that sign contracts with the governments of nations like Niger, for example, that have rich uranium deposits. Okay. And let's go into the news just to show you what I'm talking about. So yeah. So yeah. So yeah, this is the article, the headline right here. Oreno considering sale of Niger uranium assets, right? Because basically what happened was, and I think I even did a video on this, where you had the Oreno CEO, you know, he was the arrest warrant for the Oreno CEO was written by the Niger government, and Oreno was instructed to stop all its mining operations within the Niger, right? So basically, they wanted to remake the contract, okay, because the contracts that these Jake, West African governments that are mainly control that are mainly Israelite nations, right? As far as the leaders of these nations, right? I suspect through the spirit that a lot of the leaders of the nations here in Africa are all heathen, so whether it's Hamites or even Ishmaelites as well. So, like I was saying, okay, so basically, what you have is that this corporation, right, usually signs a deal with the government itself, right, like a 10-year deal, a 20-year deal on for mining. So they will mine the resources, right? But of course, they will mine the raw material and ship the raw material to another nation, mainly, whether it's France or even Canada as well, right? Because I believe Oreno, the headquarters should be in Canada, okay? So they would ship the raw materials and process it in another nation, whether it's either Canada or France, right? And then after processing it, they will now sell the processed material to different European nations. And of course, during this whole thing, right? Where after the when the contracts are done, when the contract is signed, right, the amount of money the African nation where the resources or the raw materials are actually being mined from get the amount of money these nations get are just minuscule, right? So you have a contract that could be like 70-30. So all they'll do is just pay for the raw materials and carry it and go. The processing is done in a different place. And the processed materials are usually far more expensive than the raw materials. Like for example, here in Nigeria, Nigeria is one of those oil producing nations, right? So here in Nigeria, for example, the crude oil is mined, right? By the Nigerian government and then sold to Shell. sold to Exxon, sold to all the sold to big oil basically as a raw material. Then it is now refined in places like Qatar, right? Places like in the Middle East, places like Qatar, places like okay, the only refinery I know of is the one in Qatar, right? And then it's now sold back to the Nigerian government as the refined oil. So the oil and the fuel, the gas that we use here in Nigeria for vehicles and for other not electronics, but all these but for vehicles, right, and so on and so forth. Okay, the gas, the petrol, the fuel, the diesel that we use is not actually being refined here in Nigeria. It's being refined, in another country, and then the refined oil is being sold back to us. So that's why you see that these African nations, even though they are so mineral rich, they are always poor because there are multiple levels of exploitation taking place. Okay, and this is an example of one of those levels of exploitations where you have these illegal mining operations being conducted within the country, and you always have these situations where they're always arresting somebody, or either one of these hidden nations for conducting these illegal mining operations, right? Whether it's the Congo, right? Whether it is the Nigeria, whether it is Ghana, whether it is even Niger, because I believe that one recently happened in Niger as well, where, like I said, you have them being arrested for these operations that they are conducting, right? And I think I also mentioned that. Let me go to that precept real quick. That our people are under the curses. That is why this is able to happen to our people, and the reason why we are under the curses is, of course, disobedience to the word of the Most High, Yahweh Hashem Yahushai. So this is the book of Daniel 9 verse 5. We have sinned and committed iniquity, and have done wickedly, and have rebelled, even by departing from thy precepts and from thy judgments. Neither have we hearkened unto thy servants the prophets, which spake in thy name to our kings, our princes, and our fathers, and to all the people of the land. Right. So because our people, right, did not hearken, did not listen, and do the words of the Most High, Yahweh Hashem Yahushai, that were given to us by the prophets and the men of the Lord, that is why our people are in the condition that we are currently in right now. We are under the curses, okay? Now Daniel 9 verse 7, O Yahweh, righteousness belongeth unto thee, but unto us confusion of faces as at this day, to the man of Judah, and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and to all Israel that are near and that are far off, through all the countries whither thou hast driven them, because of their trespass, and they have trespassed against thee. Right. And that's why you see that there is so much confusion, right, upon our people. And really, if you go into this confusion of face, I believe it also means shamefaced as well. Let me get that. Right, confusion of faces, and the word that is there is bashat. Bashat. Shame, shameful thing, right? So basically, our people are in that position of, that lowly position, right? That humbled position right now, and that's the reason why you always see all this news about, Jake being at the bottom, right? All these, things in the all this news in the media about Jake's being at the bottom, about the so-called Negroes and the condition of our people in this kingdom, right? And that's why these operations take place all over the countries that Jake are in, because illegal mining operations also happen, right? Illegal resource extractions also happen in the Northern Kingdom as well, in South America, because everything I talk about here in West Africa, right, it also applies to South America as well. But in South America, it's mainly because of the because of the Monroe Doctrine and things like that, right? It's mainly Babylon that has control of a lot of the operations that go on in South America, right? Because of the things like the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, so let me just for edification purposes, right? The Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine. So this is the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy, was declared by President James Monroe in 1823. It essentially states that the Western Hemisphere is off limits for European colonization and intervention, and such actions would be considered a hostile act against the US. The doctrine aimed to prevent European powers from expanding their influence in the Americas and to protect the newly independent nations of Latin America. Right. And that's the justification and the excuse that Esau would give, right, in order to try to make it seem as though he was altruistic. But as we know, right, when Esau Edom doeth good, he doeth it not of his own will, right? Let me see if I can find that precept, because it's always difficult for me to remember where that precept is at. Like I was saying, when Esau Edom doeth good, he doeth it not of his own will. Ecclesiasticus 14 verse 7, and okay, Ecclesiasticus 14, yeah, verse 7, no, Ecclesiasticus 14, and I'll start from verse yeah, verse 7. And if he doeth good, he doeth it unwillingly, and at the last he will declare his wickedness. Right. So the reason for the Monroe Doctrine isn't because Esau was just so benevolent and wanted to help, right, the Northern Kingdom. No, it was in order for the only influence that the Northern Kingdom would get after they got their independence from Spain, right, to be America, Babylon the Great. That's why a lot of these Northern Kingdom nations deal primarily with America, Babylon the Great, because of the Monroe Doctrine, right? Doctrine was only written and set up in order to consolidate power within the Americas, right, to Esau Edom, okay. And of course, it was backed by the UK at the time, right? Because these devils, man, this is how Esau Edom operates, man. Anyhow, sha. And that's basic, anyhow, sha, right? So that, right now, so back to what I was saying. I'm back to the main video, and hopefully that audio wasn't too loud, right? I don't know how to shut that enough yet, but yeah, back to what I was going into, and this is just basically a highlight into the different things that go on here in Nigeria and the reason for why they happen. So if you are a West African, right, and you are wondering, right, or if you're just if you are a West African, right, or and you're wondering why is it that these other nations can come into our country and do as they please, set up illegal mining operations, set up these they'll set up illegal mining operations, right, exploit the resources to their pleasure, right, or for to their full pleasure. This is the reason why, because our people, you are the Israelites, right? The so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native American Indians, the scattered Israelites that are scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. And the reason why you can't enjoy the benefits of being an Israelite as the scriptures are described is because we are still under the curses, alright? And the only way out is repentance. So with that, I'll end the video right there. Once again, all praises, glory, and honor unto Yahweh Ba'asham Yawashai, Ba'asham Kwadash, Wa Abad Babal, Shalom. And through the Spirit of Yakiam and you are edified. Shalom.